Hello, everybody. My name is Jake. Back. Wow. Welcome back to Seriously, a Life in Business podcast. This week, I am with Jolie, as per usual, and
Hello.
we don't have video anymore, but we do have a second technical co-host on the couch with us. We have a little puppy. So
Her name is Rory.
if you hear any chingling of chains or her collar or whatever, she's here to vibe with us today. So we'll give you updates. Anyway, this week we are talking about the first 90 days. And what that means is, particularly in a new position, after you've been hired, once you're in the position, how do you, one, correctly enter the position within the first 90 days, two, set a great example for yourself, be good in the position, things of that nature, and two, really start to integrate with your position, knowing the people on either your team or the people who you report to and stuff like that, and building that rapport successfully to set you up for that future 2-3 years that you're there. So you really set your best precedent right at the start. And I kind of wanted to start this one a little bit because I think this is a fun topic.
Okay.
And for me, I have done most of my programs have been just over 90 days, right? So mine have been 4 months on average as I've
And you do a lot of
exited
contract
college.
stuff.
And I do a lot of contract stuff where the 90 days is all you get, So I have a lot of experience of going from brand new to within 30 to 45 days, top of my game, doing the best I can pretty quickly. And I really wanted to start with that because a lot of people who might be listening might be in internships, might be in short-term positions. If they do contract work like me, they'll have short-term contracts. And those people who have been in those positions, that's the perfect time to practice this skill early on in your career. And I'll give a great example. I worked for this multinational, right? Around, I think, 23, I think it was, where I was a marketing intern. And I worked on, I think it was a team of like 3 to 5. It was kind of an extended team because we did more than just marketing. But I remember when I showed up, because the person who interviewed me wasn't my boss, but my boss's boss. And so when I got into the position, it was the first time I was meeting my boss. It was the first time I was meeting most of the team members, and it was on site. They were doing like an event, and I had to show up on site. I didn't have a computer in a cubicle as I would have expected, and so I had to adapt and learn on the fly. And what was really good about that position is in that first 5 to 10 days, it was a very high important situation where we had this big project going on and we had to nail it. And what you want to do, and I had struggled with this. I struggled with the first 2 to 3 days because I didn't know what to do, right? I wasn't put at a desk. I didn't have a task in front of me immediately to do. But it very much felt like my work in videography and my work in photography, where you set up a scene, you set up tech, you do stuff like that. And while I was never assigned to anything, what I needed to do in that first 5-10 days is really set myself forward and say, this is me, this is what I'm bringing to this position. And I remember we had to set up this tent where they were going to have a presentation, and there was this out of company tech guy who was putting all the stuff together. And I had finished putting up the tent and helping with that, but the tech guy was having issues. Now, I went forward and I asked that guy, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "Yeah, the speakers are yada 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 yada." And the way I put myself apart is, I'm a tech guy. I know how this stuff works. Is I went to him and I was like, "Have you? Don't mind me asking." I did it very politely. I was like, "Can I help?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, if you want to look at it, I don't know what the issue is." And I was able to look at it and quickly kind of surmise within about 5 minutes what the issue was, because it was a feedback issue between certain XLR lines and stuff. And he missed it because he was looking at the wrong side of the panel, because it was one of those swivel panels you have on carts where one side is inputs, one side is outputs. And I remember saying, "Have you," and I didn't even touch the stuff or anything. I just asked, "So if they're running into here and this is here and yada, 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 is this doing this?" And he's like, "I didn't check that." And then he checked. And I remember because when we finally did go back to office after that event, my boss, who I had just met, approached me and said, yeah, I talked to the tech guy and he said you were insurmountably helpful in that situation. And that's the first 5 to 10 days. But that experience that I shared is a great mindset to go in with, right? Now, in that case, it was a little bit of an extreme circumstance, but you really want to take that first 5 to 10 days while you're acclimating to figure out how do you want to stand out in this position, right? For me, I was younger than I am. I was hungry and I really wanted to show my competence and my skill. And while this is not for certain, I was given much higher responsibilities than a typical intern would have been given later into that position because I felt that my competence shone so early and my ability to come forward and say, I can do this, I will learn, I will yada, 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 gave me that opportunity to then learn harder work and things I hadn't experienced before. And that's my quick 2 cents because I think that will set the pace for what we're covering in overall the 90 days. But that's a great foot in the door. Here I am. This is me. This is what I do. And I had no on paper marketing experience at that point when I had that internship. So it was really coming in and swinging for the fences, bringing my best foot forward. But I don't know. What are your thoughts? What do you want to take this
Well,
conversation?
no, and I think that's a great example. I think there are two approaches when you come into a new position.
Yeah.
If you're coming into a position as a new hire, relatively inexperienced, if you're in an intern or a contract or a short-term type of assignment, they may not have a good onboarding program for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you describe is absolutely critical. What is the need right now? And how do I jump in and help in that need?
Mm-hmm.
That's really important. And sometimes, as arrogant as this may sound, they may not even know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so, not being arrogant and saying, well, this is wrong or that's wrong, but the approach that you described is saying, how can I help? Can I look at this for you? Can I look at that for you? That certainly will set you apart. And it's like in the interview, you just have a very short period of time to make that first impression. I think, unfortunately, what happens with younger talent when they first come in is they do sit and kind of wait to be told what to do or wait to be asked. And I don't believe that sets them apart. Now, I think not everybody will have the experience that you described. Sometimes they come in, they're not really giving an onboarding program. They're just told, sit here and we'll train you to do X.
Yeah.
There are other things that you can do to set yourself apart. One of the things that I would recommend is pulling from what a formal interview or what a formal onboarding program would be, is say things to like your boss or even your colleagues. Well, who is the customer of my work? Where does the input to my work come from?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who should I know? What are the things that might be stumbling blocks for me? I think that's how you can set yourself apart and figure out where can you add value. Now, if you're coming into more of a permanent or regular position, because no job's ever permanent, keep that in mind, but certainly you should have some type of an onboarding program. And I think the key elements to an onboarding program that are something that you could add to if you're not getting it is you should ask for or be able to tap into where is the org chart. So the organizational chart, so you know who are the different leaders,
Mm-hmm.
who are the different people in the departments, because it can be really hard in that first few weeks or months to really get outside of your space, right? Because you're coming in and you may be overwhelmed with just task work. But kind of understanding, if you're coming into a creative position, who else is in the department and who do we interact with? Who are outside vendors? If you're coming into a finance job, what are the adjacencies to finance? You might need to know a little bit about IT. You might need to know a little bit about who's your HR people. You might even want to know, like, are there affinity groups or social clubs or things like that many times are not as publicized as they could be. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. And sometimes if you don't get that, you can go online, and there may be tools online that you can find it. But finding a colleague who can kind of show you those things, and you can ask, who are the admins? Who's the receptionist at the front desk if you have that? Who is the departmental admin? Who is the CEO's admin if you're in a smaller company and you might interact with that person? And it's some of it, yes, is a little bit about smoozing. I'm not going to lie to you, but a lot of it is understanding how the organization works
Hmm.
and your role in that organization.
Where does your gear fit?
Yes. And another thing, I think I mentioned this on one of our prior podcasts, is I always go and at least read the excerpt of the book First 90 Days. Sometimes I'll read the entire book, and I didn't even know how many times I've read it. But it reminds you of things that you either maybe forgot because you were well past 90 days in the last job, possibly, or it just reminds you of how to approach things. I think setting schedules for yourself, one of the things that I always did when I hired even entry level positions is I said, these are the 10 people I want you to meet week 1, and here are 10 people for week 2 and 10 people for week 3. When I'm onboarding a leader, I will set up those meetings week 1 and then say, from that point on, I want you to set them up. But knowing who you should know, knowing who you'll be working with, knowing who will be getting the results of your work, knowing where you need to go to get information that you need, all of those things might not be handed to you. So you want to focus on that. You also want to be observant. Number 1, read the freaking handbook. Know the handbook, know the policies. Set up time with your HR person if you have questions or you don't understand. Don't be arrogant and challenge the handbook in your first 90 days, but make sure you understand things like, what is the dress code? Not just what do I see, but what really is the dress code? Um, you know, is there flexible start times? Are there flexible end times? Is there any flexibility on my hour lunch hour, or is it only 30 minutes? Those are things that are kind of important. Understanding the communication channels of the company. Do they do town halls? Do they do departmental meetings? All of those things are important. And then one of the things that I preached about to my team is you should have an operating system. And so in that operating system, it could be as simple as you have an Outlook calendar and you're putting in your reoccurring meetings to make sure that you don't miss them. Anything that you've been invited to, you've color coded them. What's absolutely critical? Maybe make that a red. Can't forget this. And then take those and back up. Do I need to do work before? I mean, your first week, you're not going to be able to, but make sure you're planning time for you to do your work. Do I have a deliverable in this meeting? Is the purpose of this meeting just information? Is the purpose of this meeting collaboration? Is the purpose of this meeting output? Make sure that you understand as you're entering those meetings what is expected of you or what is expected of others. Are you providing information or are you collecting information? All of those things are important to know from the get-go, and don't expect somebody to hand it to you. Go in there and listen and observe. Make your social network. Make sure you get your professional contacts in place and you understand the company. I think that's really critical. But there are lots of resources out there, and I'm very kind of nerdy and academic, but like I said, the first 90 days, what to expect. There's lots of different books out there. I think even What Color Is Your Parachute has a section on onboarding. And you could just go out and Google onboarding or go out and watch different onboarding videos, but making sure that you understand what the operational system is that you need so that you can be successful. You don't want to be week 5 and this is the 5th time you've been into the meeting and you're still not prepared with what you're responsible for because nobody's told you to do it or nobody's asked you for it. That's really important.
Well, and here's something I mentioned it briefly in my little opening allude section is like you should operate how you want to be expected to operate as well in those first 90 days, right? What is your pace? What is your tone? And what I mean by that is not the best output at all times across those 90 days. Don't start with a sprint, right? Start with what is your standard, right? What is your normal pace? What is your normal execution? What is your normal start to delivery, right? Start there. Start your standard, because then, and I mean this from both a yourself standpoint as a worker, but also in the company's eye. If you need to sprint, right, there will be an opportunity in those first 90 days to show that, right? How do you work under pressure? How do you work on a time constraint, And you don't want to start with your highest immediately, right? It's like long distance running. You don't want to start sprinting for the first 5 minutes and then go slow the last five. You want a standard pace across the 10. And maybe there are moments where you go a little faster. Maybe there are moments where you go a little slower, depending on the situation. But you want that wiggle room, right? So, and this is something I hate personally, and it's not against any company or business for using it. The whole always give your 100% is really annoying, because I know people who have taken that as do the best 100%, max output, max it, whatever, the entire time. And while there are people who can do that, that is not something everyone can manage to do. There will be times where you're slower. There will be times where you're faster, as I mentioned. You should, in my opinion, the way I think about it is I go in with about 80%. And then if I need to up it, I'll up it to 100% when it's needed. But I don't, now that's just in the phrasing of how do you judge yourself and pace yourself. And you still want to operate as if you're giving your best foot forward and doing the best you can. But you do not want to put yourself in a position where your first 90 days or your first 30 days or whatever is the best you can do always at that time. The best, you're sprinting, spending all the time you can in and out to do everything. You don't want to put yourself in that position, I think, because it sets a bad precedent that if you are expected to go harder at some point, it might be so much harder.
Well, let me try to rephrase what I think I hear you saying.
Yeah,
I
please.
have a little bit of a mental reaction to that.
Yeah.
This is what I might suggest. And for everything with me, there's a story. So, for example, I'm a morning person.
Mm-hmm.
I am at my very best in the morning before anybody else is in the office.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I stay at a high peak until I have lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I have lunch at 10 because I've been in the office since 6, then the rest of my day is going to have lower output.
Yeah.
If I can hold off and not have lunch till 1 or 2, maybe a little snack, maybe a little couple of almonds or something. But once I have lunch, my productivity drops off. I know that about myself because I'm old and you learn your cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I like to get into the office really early, because most of my team or my peers wouldn't get into the office until 8. Well, if I'm in there at 6, I have 2 hours of massive output,
Mm-hmm.
which is why everybody was like, you get more work done than 4 or 5 people. It's because I know my productivity levels.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I'm at my best. And then I would tell people on my team, please don't schedule a meeting after 3 o'clock, because I probably won't make a decision until the next morning anyway, because I don't make my best decisions late in the day. Now, historically, I've always worked for companies that people came in 8 or a little bit later, and then they want to stay till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. That doesn't fit my style. It
Mm-hmm.
never has. And early in my career, I had to try to adapt to that, because that's how most companies function. You come in a little bit later, but you stay late into the night. And I could model that behavior, but I couldn't sustain that behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
once I started getting into positions where I was the leader, I would say to my people, I don't expect you to come in at 6 o'clock. Or if I'm sending you an email at 3 o'clock in the morning, I don't expect you to respond to it. I expect you to start your day at 8 and work until the end of your day. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to start earlier and you want to respond to stuff earlier, that's fine, but I'm not going to hold it against you if you wait until 8:30 to respond to my 3 a.m. email because I woke up thinking, oh, I have to get this done.
Yeah.
Not everybody's wired like me. I think that's how I hear you say.
Yeah, you're
you need to
communicating
figure
it better than I am,
Yeah,
for sure.
because you don't want to come in and say, well, don't give it your all. You should give it your all, but you should understand that you can't be at 100% all day.
That's a
every
better
day.
way to phrase what I'm saying.
You can be at
Yes.
150, like I'm at 150%
Mhm.
until maybe 10 o'clock, and then I drop to maybe 100% until I eat, and then I
Well,
fall
so
off to about 70%.
I want to add to this because I have a very weird productivity angle, And it's tough because I have this puppy that sleeps with me now, that makes me go to bed at 9, which I hate because it's my most productive hour, which is annoying, is like 10 to 12 at night. Why? I have no idea. But everything that I have made that is like the best of the best I've ever done is then. I had now that's never gonna fit into a into an easy work position.
What's interesting
But
about that is I remember it's probably been a decade ago now. The company I was working at, and everybody who hears this term will say, "Oh, I know what company you worked at." We were looking for disruptors and multipliers.
Mhm.
Multiplier is a sales model that didn't come from this company. But one of the things that we were working on from an HR perspective is for high tech type of jobs,
Mhm.
creative type of jobs, we tried to go to a non-scheduled workday because we found
Mm.
that a lot of the really incredible engineers and the creative technology folks and we didn't have like a lot of creatives like in your space for writing and stuff like that, but people who generated like software as a solution or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
generated that next level concept like the Apple space, they had models like you. They might be really productive from 10 to 1 o'clock and then not be productive again until 6 o'clock in the morning, but want to be done at 10.
Yeah,
And so
I'll
now
say
that's not going to be for most of the people. I think
for
that's very
sure
rare,
it is.
but it is true.
And it's interesting because it's like I actually have looked for positions that base their hours on the other coast, specifically because I work better in the evening through night, right? And the further I can push my day into the evening, the better I get at it. It's interesting because I run all these event hosting stuff we talked about in another podcast episode, and a lot of those are at night, right? Other than except the not weekend ones. But that's because at night it's I don't know what it is. I can't explain it. Obviously, this is a discussion way above our head too. But something that I think is interesting is it's like for me it's noise is not the word, but it will replicate the idea. The day is very noisy and the night isn't. That's why I work better at night. I can't explain what that
No,
means
I understand what that
exactly.
means because to me, the morning is not noisy. The
It's
morning is
similar
very
then. Yeah, yeah,
quiet.
yeah, yeah.
And then I used to say this, I'm really productive until everybody comes to work.
Mhm.
And
Once
then
there's
it's just,
energy,
oh
it's
my
hard.
gosh, it's people in my office, people wanting this, people wanting that. It's meetings. And I
Hmm,
just
hmm,
go 8 hours
hmm.
of nothing but meetings where I get nothing done.
Yeah.
But sit in meetings and be like, good God, if I sit in another meeting, which
Well,
is
and
why I retired early.
it's something. It also I think that was ingrained in me somewhat in like college, right? Because in college I would have classes. Some of my classes ended at 8 p.m.
Yeah,
You
you always
know,
went for
I
night
had
classes.
really late class, and I liked late classes. I really like and there's something about the vibe of night I really prefer. But the idea that I would go like I would have all of my classes start afternoon because I would go back to my room. I would work until 1 a.m. I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up at 9. Then I would go about my day. I'd get lunch, go to my classes, repeat. But anyway, divulging off the topic there. But
But I
I
think it's
agree.
important because you're right. You need to understand what your natural chemistry is
Hmm.
and do your best. And this goes beyond 90 days, but in the first 90 days, you're going to have to adjust a little bit to the dynamics of that environment,
Hmm.
but know and play to your strengths. I think that's what you were
Well,
trying to say.
and it's funny because in that position I talked about earlier at the start of this episode, there was we had to I had to clock in for my position because it was hourly, and I remember it wasn't my boss, but it was someone who my boss talked to that I heard it from eventually, is that I would clock in early a little bit and then still clock out at the normal time, right? And maybe I should have thought about that, but I would clock in early so I could start doing my work. If I wasn't clocked in, my brain didn't go into work mode. And so I'd clock in at really like 7:30 instead of 8, right? And so for that first 30 minutes, I was on the ball. There was no emails coming my way. There was no, I was just going, 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 going. And there were days in that position where I was just waiting for new stuff to do. I remember because I would get so much done in the first 4 to 5 hours and then be done. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because that was a position where eventually I was told, yeah, you should clock in at 8, exactly at 8
And
is
that's
supposed to
because I
even
think the
get.
team you worked in, perhaps, they were not oriented to that. And so
Yes.
they're like, well, we don't know what you're doing.
And that's fair. That's totally fair by all regards. And that's something maybe I should have communicated that clearer as well. But it was an internship. It was a short-term position. It wasn't a big
I
deal.
think they were understanding probably. Usually you are. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
just clock in at 8.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it actually, I think, ended up going like I would really start wrapping up around 4:30 because I would start mentally at 7:30 and I was there early, right? So I and that's kind of my thing that I arrive 30 minutes early to everything and
Well,
start 30 minutes
and
early.
I do think
But
now, and maybe my perspective is somewhat limited to manufacturing in professional settings, but usually most companies today that aren't in like customer service
mhm,
or probably like retail or something like that. Most of the companies I've been at, they have a little bit of a flexible start time within an hour to an hour and a half. So you
yeah.
could start anywhere from 7 to maybe 8,
Mhm,
and you could end anywhere from 4 to 5,
yeah.
or maybe do a 30-minute lunch. And I think that has become a lot more common because of what you're talking about.
Mhm,
Some people are morning people. Some people are not morning people. I know my husband, don't even talk to him until he's been up an hour and a half at least. I mean, I always say, "Are you in a bad mood?" "No, I just don't want to talk to you." And I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." And now that I'm retired, that's even more sensitive because I was long gone before he would get up. I'd be
mhm.
at work already.
Well, it's very interesting, especially with personal friends and stuff too, right? Because I'm a night owl, right? And I have friends who literally have to get off like whatever we're on internet, whatever it be, maybe at 9. 9 is their hard cutoff. They cannot go any further. Maybe 10, right? But no further, right? And me, I'm like, I'm just getting started at 9:30. I could go another 6 hours, but yeah, that is interesting because it's like I think that's important. Long story short, coming back to what we were talking about, know your productivity
Yes.
schedule and know when, and even if you're locked into a specific time period, find out where in that time period you're best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And adapt your best to that position. Because, like you said, not every position is permanent, right? The next position might be more flexible, the next one might not be, right? But even if that's the case, with the uprise of things like remote jobs, you could live on, like our example, live on the East Coast,
Work on the
work
West.
in the West because the hours are more adjusted to what you're good at or whatever. And I think that's something to definitely would help you in your 30 days. How do you fit in that system? How do you fit in those hours? And that would be very helpful in those first 90
Mm-hmm.
days to nail down.
Well, and I think it helps you set expectations for yourself so you don't get to the end of your 90 days and be like, I'm not fitting into the team, because you do have to fit into the team. As much as people don't like to hear that, you're coming into their home.
Yep.
You need to figure out how to be a good guest in their home until it's your home.
Yep.
And that usually doesn't happen until you're pushing about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the opportunity. But I think what I would say is you and I agree on that. I would just say it in that you need to figure out what you need to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, a lot of people now, I've been in points in my life too that I've clock watched. I'm not going to say that I haven't, because I've not been challenged or I haven't liked my job. And so you're like, okay, I know I get off at 5, so I'm going to start winding down around 4:30, and then I'm going to try to be out of here as close to 5 as possible. And then in my last 10 years or so of my career, it's like I'll get home when I get home. Maybe I can leave at 5, maybe I can leave at 6. So I might have had a 12-hour day, I might have had a 14-hour day, or today I can get out of here at 3:30. And I'm going to take advantage of that. Now, not everybody has that flexibility, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can book your time accordingly and you can show to your leader that you are productive and you are responsible to get your work done, it's more likely that you can be that exception that
Mm-hmm.
I explained of Charles, I think I called him. So that, hey, this random Thursday, I want to go sign up for a class, or I want to go to the gym, or I want to be involved with a D&D, whatever it is. It'd be more likely for them to say, sure, every Thursday I'll let you out at 4, or this Thursday you can leave at 3. You're going to set yourself up to be successful long term because you've laid the groundwork. There's another great book out there is How Full is Your Bucket? Many of us have probably heard that, but you've got to make sure you're filling your bosses and
Mm-hmm.
your colleagues' buckets. And once you fill their buckets, they're going to be a lot more likely to give you a little bit of it back
Hmm.
than if you're constantly dipping into their bucket and you're never replenishing. So, lots of different books you can read. If you haven't read any of those, I think those are really good. Um, Maybe someday we could even just list a bunch. I mean, I've got professional books coming out my ears. I literally, in my home office, when I brought all my stuff back from my work office, I have 500 books probably.
Hmm.
And so I could at some point in time go through those and tell you which ones were most meaningful to me. Those two are really ones that I reread probably annually.
All right. Well, you know what? Well, we this very short episode right now. I think. Hold on. Let me. I can't see how far we are exactly, but we have a little more time. So let me also throw in a little bit something else. So with those first 90 days, we talk about a little bit of the how do you set yourself up for success? How do you prepare yourself for your efficiency schedule? We'll call it. Um, I think another thing that would be important, because you talked a lot about onboarding, right? Understanding things like the premises and stuff like that. I think what is also important to an extent is understanding who your business impacts, right? Because especially now, who's the customer in some situations, who's the community in other situations, because it depends on your company. Not every company is going to have a target they're looking for. Some companies are just GitHub repos full of coders. Like that's not going to be the exact same. But it's also who does your company impact, right? So there are companies where like you build cars. Okay, you build cars, customers get cars. It's pretty straightforward, right? But there are other companies where it's like, okay, you are working on a magazine. Okay, that's a little different. It's not who's the customer as much as is this a community magazine? Is this apologies, audio listeners, if you heard the bark in the background. Our other dog probably saw a person. But yeah, anyway, talking about that, generally speaking, the idea being that a lot of these ideas in the direction of who is your business really hitting on. Now, I'll give a good example. My business that I run, we have 3 denominations, and each of those denominations have a different target. But some of those denominations do different things, right? So one of them is a game publisher, so we publish games, but not only do we publish, we develop. So not only do we have to worry about what do we make and what do we put out, but also going in the direction of who do we work with on the developing side and stuff like that's important. Another leg of my business that has to think about what direction are we going in is our book publishing section, where on one hand, yes, we publish books for customers. On the other hand, we make publicly available things for people to use to make their own books, right? And we also publish books. So we not only have to appeal to, okay, here's our customer, but here's the people we work with in the space. Here's the purpose of what we do. This is why we do it. Because some of our things, I know we are releasing next Friday from when we're recording this, we're releasing a completely free toolkit for people to use. We need to understand those people, right? Who are the people we're making this kit for? Why are we making the kit? And in that case, it's a hyper specific example, but when you think of things like magazines, when you think of things like cars, you got to think, okay, is it a customer I'm aiming at, or is it a community, or is this for a group of people? This is especially important, I think, in government based positions, right? Where your influence or the things you do impact a larger community, right? Even if you're just an administrative assistant in a random government building to a mayor, that's still something you have to think about in that position, because it's very important to recognize I'm doing this for X people. I'm doing this for this community. The things I do directly will impact in one way or another. And in the first 90 days, I think it's very important to nail down that exactly, because if you don't have the knowledge of what all this work is for, right? You won't have the There are situations where I've seen people not have the dedication and the attention to it because they think, oh, I'm just an administrative assistant. I just yada yada yada.
Great ad.
But I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Because, it's so interesting. I talk a lot about this mentor that I had for a big chunk of my career. And one of the things that I remember when he appointed me to a particular role, one of the things that he said, you know the customer. I'm always disappointed by how many of your peers don't know anything about the customer.
Hmm.
And at the time I paused for a moment and I thought, well, I'm in HR. Is he talking about the people being our customer? But that's not what he was
It's
talking
not what I was
about.
talking about.
He was talking about, I understood the business model. I understood what
Hmm.
the output of what we created, where it went, how we sold it, how we made money. I say that to a lot of HR people. You don't understand how the business makes money. You think we sell the car and that's how we make money.
Hmm.
That's not how we make
It's
money.
not how you, yeah,
Right? We're taking raw
more
materials
complicated.
and we're translating, and so there's a lot of that for, younger talent to the space, newer talent, I shouldn't say younger because age should be irrelevant, but newer talent, it is important to understand who is your customer, how do you make money? There are many companies out there, there are some companies out there that actually make a product that they sell at a loss because they make money someplace else. I always talk about this one company that I worked for. We sold braking systems for aircraft. We actually gave the braking system away.
Hmm.
So the Deltas of the world, the Southwests of the world, they essentially got what we made, which was nasty carbon, very icky stuff, to be honest with you, but necessary to have an airplane. We gave it to them for free. And I'd be like, what the hell is wrong with us? But we charged the airline and the airport every time the brakes were used.
Well, and let me throw
And
in
that was
something
our
else,
model.
more modern, right? Because I speak very high praises of this company all the time, as you know from our conversations. Valve, who is the company behind the biggest online game platform in the world, Steam, they actively make decisions like that constantly. Because at the end of the day, they, at their heyday, when they started, they made games and they sold games. That was it. Nowadays, they run this very integral platform to this entire medium in the space. Like, we're talking near monopoly level of importance. And they wield that power as humanely as they can. When they make new products, they made a handheld not many years ago. They take and I don't know if they released the information, but I remember hearing it's like a $300 device and they make like $5 on each one. Absolutely horrible margins, horrific margins. But they said in interviews when asked why was that the direction you guys went, they're like, at the end of the day, we just want more people to be able to do this. We wanted to make an affordable device more people can access without having to build computers to enjoy this medium. And that's an interesting example of they know they are targeting this group. You got to know what your company stands for, and like I say, not only the people you're going for, but how are you approaching that? It's another example, more known, Costco. There are Costco might be the most consumer friendly place on the planet, to be fair, but there's, like I've told you this, there have been leaked holder meetings about the CEO when people were telling the CEO, oh, due to inflation, we're gonna have to raise the price of the food course. He just says, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
We are not raising the price of the
Well,
food court. And it's like, that's the type of, like, you need to
yeah.
understand that company's
Well,
vision. That's Costco's, you know?
and to some extent too, there is a correlation to having those cheap hot dogs and drinks to higher sales in other areas.
There is, for
And
sure.
so I know now I sound like a horrible person, but every company has to make money. So the concept that they just give stuff away from the goodness of their heart, I think they do have a philosophy around it and saying that's who we are, that's our baseline, that's critical. But in the event that they start losing money or they're not viable, they're going to have to make other
No,
changes.
no. And I'm not arguing any of that. I'm just saying that the people who are in those positions, and when you are in a company, you need to understand if that is the direction the company wants to act in. Because there are plenty of companies out there, Microsoft, Apple, most of the big tech companies, that actively make decisions to piss off their consumers. And they make horrible price hikes and horrible software decisions. But that's just what they do. But if you're in a company that has an angle like a Valve or a Costco, you need to understand that
I
as an
agree with that.
employee there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, one of the things that makes a successful long career at a company is when your there's an alignment on values.
For sure. Yes.
One of the things that's so interesting, and I used to tell this story, and I'm going to dumb it down just a little bit because it gets way too complicated. But my I went to work for a company that was basically teetering on bankruptcy,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really seduced to go work for them. And I use that word deliberately because I love a turnaround. I love an underdog. I'm really good about putting HR practices, policies, procedures, and philosophies in place that enable the business to recover. I'm not a growth person, but I'm great about let's fix what's broken. And I find it thrilling, exciting, all those types of things. But we went through a period of time that we actually met every day to determine what bills were we going to pay and what bills were we not going to pay on time so that we could make payroll.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was the foundation of why I was willing to take the risk, because we all agreed we would always make payroll. There was nothing that we were going to do that would make us fail to make payroll. And what that
And
means
that's
is
important
we
to
were going
know.
to pay
Yeah.
people. And so I remember asking the CEO at the time, I even said, when push comes to shove, what's the most important thing? And he said, it'll be paying our people for the work that they've provided. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's okay, because the rest of it will come. As long as you have that ethical line of, I will always take care of the people that are making the product, the rest will come. But when you start sacrificing, yeah, I'll pay them later in order to get X today, that will never be recoverable.
Well, and that's why, especially not to go back to the tech sphere again, that's the big issue in the tech sphere. Because you see companies like Microsoft, Amazon, they'll want to do this thing, they'll invest a bunch in it, realize that was a bad call, and then lay off hundreds of thousands of people, you know?
Well, and sometimes you
And
do have to lay off because sometimes you're sacrificing a few to save the many,
well, and that's true too, but I'm saying
but
like
don't invest in the
don't
people then.
invest in the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, because what will happen is those companies will get off all those people and then hire a bunch. And it's like you're just repeating the exact
Yeah.
same cycle you ran into. But anyway, enough
I've
about
worked I've worked for those companies. I got to tell you, this is one of the things
it
I said at one
pisses me
point
off all the time.
is I worked at one particular company that we became expert at laying people off,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out how to lay them off, figuring out when to lay them
Just
off, and then
awful.
we'd turn around and we rehire people. And that I was there quite a while. That was the one thing that I never could get acclimated to. It made me sick.
Mm-hmm.
Now I obviously exercised it and I became really good at furloughs, really good at laying people off. But that was the number one reason I had when I left, because I said, I can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the beginning or at certain periods of time, it is a necessary evil.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got 2,000 people and really I only need 1,000 people, then I have an obligation to try to save the 1,000
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure the company can be successful, and I need to cut out costs and things like that. So sometimes those things happen. But back, and I think I really started getting engaged in that stuff during the crash of like '07, '08, '09. Cutting people's pay, having people take pay reductions. Oh yeah, we'll have you work less, but we never really did. We did furloughs at the beginning of the year where we just said for 2 weeks you're not going to work and not get paid. Well, that has a significant impact on people who live paycheck to paycheck. We reduced like their insurances. We
Mm-hmm.
cut out bonuses. Which people, I know that sounds like that's not a big deal, but some people
Live
count
off
on
that.
that bonus as part of their compensation.
Yep.
They're saying, well, that is supposed to make up the gap from where I was before. We stopped doing like match in their 401k. There were lots of choices that we made that at the beginning I could get my head around because it was a financial crisis and we were trying to salvage the business and keep jobs for as many people as we could.
Mm-hmm.
But it went on and it went on, and we got better and better and better at it. And we were having record profitability, record growth, record revenue, all of these things. And I'm still doing these actions as if we were on the brink of bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
And after a period of time, I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. And most of the peers that I had that left, say a year before me or a year after me, that's in HR, that's where we all were. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
When I could justify it, when I could understand it was in the best interest of all, when I had an obligation to people. But that's going to be important in this space that we're talking about. You need to make sure that you know who you are and you know what you stand for.
For sure.
And if you're, this will be a later one at some point. If those things aren't aligned, you will never be happy there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and that ties back to ethics, that we talked about the other episode. But we'll
which are
cut it
situational, but okay.
here for now. We'll cut it here
Yep.
for now.
All right.
I feel like we covered a lot. We
Yeah.
went off a little bit
We
there at the end, but
diverged.
I
Yeah.
feel like we covered most of the first 90 days. And you know what? I guess what we talked about there at the end, that is important to have in your 90 days. If in your first 90 days you're like, oh my gosh, this is the most immoral stuff I've ever done, I can't live with myself. Well, there you go. But anyway, thank you all for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. We will see you guys next time. And that is me, Jayke and Jolie, signing out. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.